Listen, I'm about to share something that's going to make you look at people in your life completely differently. And honestly, that's exactly what needs to happen. Because right now, someone close to you might be carrying something that isn't theirs. I'm talking about demonic attachments, and before you click away thinking this is some Hollywood horror nonsense, understand this. What I'm describing happens in broad daylight, in normal homes to people who would never consider themselves spiritual or religious. The signs are so subtle that most people live their entire lives surrounded by these attachments without recognizing them. And that ignorance? It's by design. Over the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you through 5 unmistakable signs that someone has attracted a demonic presence into their orbit. These aren't vague feelings or superstitions. These are observable, documented patterns that spiritual practitioners, exorcists, and even certain psychologists have identified but rarely discuss publicly. If you're in a rush, crank this up to 1.5 times speed, but don't skip sections because each sign builds on the last. By the end, you'll have a framework that could literally protect you and the people you love. Let's get into it. Sign 1, sudden personality inversions that defy explanation. You know that person who was always the peacemaker, the one who'd diffuse arguments at family dinners and somehow make everyone feel heard? Now they're the one starting fights over nothing, creating division where there was none. Or maybe it's the opposite. Someone who was vibrant and opinionated has gone completely flat, like someone dimmed their internal light switch. I'm not talking about gradual change or natural growth. I'm talking about a switch that flips in a matter of days or weeks, leaving everyone around them confused and asking, what happened to them? Here's what's really happening beneath the surface. Demonic attachments don't possess people in the theatrical sense we see in movies, not initially anyway. They influence. Think of it like a radio signal that gradually gets stronger, creating interference with the person's natural frequency. The first thing that interference targets: core personality traits that define who someone is. It's strategic. If someone is naturally generous, the attachment will amplify selfishness. If they're naturally anxious, it'll dial that up until they're paralyzed by fear. The goal is to make the person unrecognizable to themselves and others, creating isolation. Most people mistake this for mental illness, and sometimes there's overlap. But here's the critical difference. Mental illness typically shows warning signs, a progression. Demonic influence often appears as a sudden break. I remember talking with a woman whose husband of 15 years suddenly became obsessed with the occult after attending what he thought was a meditation retreat. Within 3 weeks, this man who'd never raised his voice was screaming at their children over minor infractions, and his eyes, she kept saying his eyes looked different. Not the color, but the expression behind them. Empty. That's the word she used, empty. What doctors won't tell you is that they're trained to look for chemical imbalances and trauma responses which are absolutely real and treatable, but they're not trained to identify spiritual interference, so they prescribe medications that can't address the root cause. You'll see the person take antidepressants or mood stabilizers with zero improvement because you can't medicate away something that isn't biological in origin. Meanwhile, the attachment strengthens its grip because everyone's looking in the wrong direction. The specific detail to watch for: the inversion happens to their strongest trait first. The generous become greedy. The honest become compulsive liars. The gentle become violent. It's always a complete 180-degree turn on whatever quality defined them most. If you've seen this exact pattern, where someone's defining characteristic flipped into its opposite within a month, you've just identified the first sign. But here's where it gets more unsettling. Sign 2. Unexplained physical deterioration without medical cause. The second sign shows up in the body and it's brutal to witness. We're talking about rapid physical decline that makes no sense to medical professionals. Someone who was healthy 6 months ago now looks like they've aged a decade. Their skin takes on this greyish quality, not pale grey. Like the vitality has been literally drained. They develop chronic exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Mysterious bruises that appear overnight in strange patterns, often in threes or in symmetrical locations on both sides of the body. Their eyes sink into their skull. They lose or gain dramatic amounts of weight despite no change in diet or activity. Here's the mechanism behind this deterioration. Demonic entities are parasitic by nature. They don't create energy, they consume it. When an attachment forms around someone, it begins feeding on their life force, what some traditions call chi or prana. Think of it like a leech, but instead of blood, it's draining spiritual and emotional energy, and that depletion manifests physically. The body is designed to regenerate when we rest, but if something is constantly siphoning energy, that regeneration never happens. It's like trying to fill a bathtub with the drain open. You're in a constant state of deficit. But here's what's really happening that most people miss. Doctors will run every test imaginable. Blood work comes back normal. Scans show nothing. Maybe they'll diagnose chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, which are real conditions. But the treatments don't work. The person takes vitamins, changes their diet, starts exercising, and nothing improves. In fact, they often get worse. That's because increased physical health actually provides more energy for the attachment to feed on. It's like fattening up livestock. Imagine a friend who was running marathons last year and now can barely climb a flight of stairs. The doctors have ruled out heart problems, lung issues, muscular disorders. Everything comes back inconclusive. But if you look at their timeline, the decline started right after a specific event, a traumatic experience, visiting a particular location, or forming a relationship with someone who themselves carries an attachment. Because here's something crucial. These things can transfer or piggyback between people through emotional bonds and physical spaces. The specific, observable detail. Look at their hands and fingernails. With natural illness, you'll see specific symptoms, yellowing, clubbing, certain patterns. With demonic attachment, the nails often become brittle and break in unusual ways, and the hands develop a slight tremor that appears mainly in the morning, within the first 30 to 45 minutes of waking. It's like the attachment is weakest after sleep, so the person's natural vitality tries to reassert itself, creating this momentary instability before the drain begins again. If you've noticed someone experiencing this unexplained decline with those specific hand symptoms, you're looking at sign number 2. And there's a third sign that's even more disturbing because it involves the people around them. Sign 3, repulsion response from animals and sensitive individuals. Now we're getting into territory that sounds strange until you witness it yourself. Animals, especially dogs and cats, will suddenly refuse to be near someone they previously loved. I'm not talking about a pet being moody or having an off day. I'm talking about visceral fear responses, backing away with their ears flat, growling at empty space around the person, or refusing to enter a room if that person is in it. Small children, particularly those under the age of 4 or 5, will also display this reaction. They'll cry when the person tries to hold them, stare at seemingly empty space around them, or make comments about the bad man or the dark thing when no one else is visible. Here's why this happens, and the science behind it is actually fascinating. Animals operate primarily on instinct and energy perception. They haven't developed the cognitive filters that humans use to rationalize away intuitive warnings. When a dog senses a threat, it doesn't think, well, that's probably just my imagination. It responds immediately. Research has shown that dogs can detect changes in human chemical composition through scent, picking up on stress hormones and disease markers we can't consciously perceive. But what they're detecting with demonic attachments isn't chemical. It's energetic. The attachment creates a distortion in the person's energy field, and animals sense that distortion as danger. Most people think their pet is just being weird or jealous. Fluffy doesn't like my new boyfriend. She's probably just protective. But contrast this with normal new person reactions from animals. Typically, there's an adjustment period with some wariness, followed by gradual acceptance. With attachments, there's no adjustment. The animal's reaction becomes more intense over time, not less. They're not protecting you from the person. They're warning you about what's attached to the person. I recall a case where a mother brought her teenage daughter to a spiritual counselor because 3 different family dogs that had known this girl since she was little, suddenly refused to be in the same room with her. The girl had started dabbling in automatic writing after finding instructions online, thinking it was just a fun way to journal. Within 2 weeks, the family's retriever would bare its teeth and back into corners whenever she approached. The terrier would urinate in fear. Even the cat, who had slept on her bed for years, would yowl and scratch at the door to be let out if she entered a room. What people don't realize is that young children have a similar unfiltered perception. Their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, so they don't yet rationalize away intuitive information. When a 3-year-old points at empty space next to someone and says, "Why is that man so angry?" or refuses to go near grandma who they previously adored, adults typically dismiss it as imagination or a phase. But monitor the pattern. If multiple animals and multiple children all show the same response to the same person during the same time frame, you're not dealing with coincidence. The specific detail to watch: the animal or child will focus on a particular area around the person, usually the left shoulder or the space directly behind them. Their eyes will track movement that no one else can see. If you've witnessed this concentrated, consistent reaction from animals or young children towards someone, always focused on the same spatial area around them, you've identified sign 3. But don't skip past this next one because it involves how the attached person interacts with sacred spaces and objects. Quick pause here. If this information is resonating and you're realizing you've seen these signs, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. Not tomorrow, not after the video, right now. Because what I'm about to share in signs 4 and 5 gets into how to protect yourself. And there's a follow-up video coming that details specific protection protocols you absolutely need to see. The algorithm buries content like this, so subscribing is how you ensure you don't miss critical information. Do it now, then let's continue. Sign 4. Adverse reactions to sacred objects and spiritual practices. This is where things get undeniable, even for skeptics. Someone with a demonic attachment will have physical and emotional reactions to specific spiritual objects and practices. And I'm not talking about philosophical disagreements or religious preferences. I'm talking about involuntary, visceral responses that they often can't control or fully explain. They'll become suddenly agitated, angry, or physically uncomfortable in churches, temples, or mosques. They might develop sudden headaches, nausea, or skin irritation when touching religious jewelry like crosses, prayer beads, or blessed medallions. Some will experience an overwhelming compulsion to remove these items immediately, as if they're burning. Here's the mechanism. Sacred objects and spaces carry concentrated spiritual energy that's been intentionally directed through prayer, ritual, and devotion over time. Think of it like spiritual voltage. When you put something low vibration near something high vibration, the energetic dissonance creates friction. The attachment, which operates at a very low corrupted frequency, experiences that friction as pain or threat. It's not the person rejecting these things. It's the entity reacting through the person, hijacking their emotional and physical responses to create distance from anything that might weaken its hold. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. The person will often rationalize these reactions with sudden philosophical positions they never held before. Someone raised Christian who never had issues with their faith will suddenly declare all religion is oppressive and refuses to attend family church events. Someone who wore a saint medal for decades will claim it's causing an allergic reaction, despite no change in the metal composition. They're experiencing genuine physical discomfort. The attachment is causing it, but their conscious mind scrambles to create a logical explanation that doesn't involve something most people don't believe exists. What most people don't realize is that this reaction isn't limited to religious items. It extends to any object or practice that carries genuine spiritual protection or elevation. Meditation apps with binaural frequencies designed for chakra clearing. They'll listen once and delete it, claiming it gave them anxiety. Certain crystals, particularly black tourmaline or selenite, which are known for energetic protection and cleansing, they'll lose them repeatedly or suddenly decide they're silly. Even positive affirmations or gratitude practices, things that raise personal vibration, will be met with resistance, mockery, or self-sabotage. The specific observable pattern: watch how they respond to being prayed over or blessed, especially if they don't know it's happening. A woman once told me her husband, who'd been acting increasingly erratic, came home early and found her praying the rosary in their bedroom. He flew into a rage unlike anything she'd seen, throwing furniture, screaming about her medieval superstitions. But here's the detail: he specifically fixated on the rosary beads themselves, demanding she throw them away, saying they made him feel like something was crawling under his skin. 2 days later, he broke them while she was at work and threw them in the outside trash, not even the kitchen garbage, like he needed them completely removed from the property. If you've witnessed someone having these extreme, disproportionate reactions to spiritual protection, especially if they're targeting specific objects for removal or destruction rather than just avoiding them, you've identified the fourth sign. And now we're at the final sign, which is the most heartbreaking because it involves the complete isolation of the person from anyone who could help them. Sign 5, strategic isolation from strong positive influences. The fifth and final sign is the most insidious because it looks like personal choice but is actually orchestrated manipulation. Someone with a demonic attachment will systematically cut off relationships with the strongest, most spiritually grounded people in their life. The friend who always gave wise counsel, they're too judgmental. The family member who prays regularly and has strong boundaries, they're toxic. The mentor who challenged them to be better, they just don't understand me anymore. One by one, every person who represented light, accountability, or spiritual strength gets pushed away and replaced with people who are either equally compromised or too weak to intervene. Here's what's actually happening behind this pattern. Demonic attachments require isolation to strengthen their hold. Think of it like an infection that thrives in darkness but withers in sunlight. Strong, positive people, especially those with genuine spiritual grounding, emit a frequency that weakens the attachment. Their presence alone creates discomfort for the entity, like holding a flashlight in a dark room. So the attachment plants thoughts, amplifies insecurities, and manufactures conflicts specifically designed to drive those people away. The person believes they're making independent decisions about who to trust, but they're being strategically isolated. But here's where it gets really disturbing. The attachment doesn't just push away positive influences, it actively attracts negative ones. The person starts forming intense, fast-moving relationships with individuals who are either spiritually compromised themselves or who enable destructive behavior. These new connections feel important, even addictive, because the attachment recognizes its own kind. It's creating an echo chamber where no one questions the deterioration everyone's witnessing. Friends who used to care about consequences are replaced with people who say, "Do whatever makes you happy," even when happy means self-destruction. Most people think they're just witnessing someone making bad choices or going through a rebellious phase, and sometimes that's exactly what it is. Not every poor decision indicates demonic influence. But contrast this with natural drift in relationships. Normally, when people grow apart, it's gradual. Interests change, life circumstances shift, but there's no hostility, just distance. With attachments, the separation is hostile, abrupt, and specifically targets people based on their spiritual strength, not personality conflicts. The person will maintain relationships with similarly troubled individuals, while systematically eliminating anyone who might pull them back toward the light. I need you to take a moment and think about someone you know who's changed. Have they cut off contact with the spiritually strongest people in their circle while surrounding themselves with progressively darker influences? Is there a pattern to who got eliminated? Always the ones who prayed, who had boundaries, who refused to co-sign destructive behavior. Because here's the timing detail that confirms this. These relationships don't just fade. They usually end with a manufactured blow-up over something relatively minor. The attachment creates a crisis, an argument, a perceived betrayal, a boundary violation, specifically designed to give the person an excuse to cut contact that feels justified. The specific detail to watch: they'll replace each strong connection with a weak one at approximately a 1-to-1 ratio, usually within 3 to 6 weeks of the cutoff. It's like the attachment can't tolerate a vacuum. It needs that energetic space filled with something that won't threaten its presence. If you've watched someone systematically eliminate their strongest supporters and replace them with enablers or equally compromised individuals, always following that timeline, you've identified the fifth and final sign. So let's bring this together. You've now got 5 concrete signs to identify demonic attachments: sudden personality inversions, targeting someone's strongest traits; unexplained physical deterioration with those specific hand tremors; repulsion from animals and children focused on particular areas around the person; adverse reactions to sacred objects and practices; and strategic isolation from positive influences. These aren't superstitions or paranoia. These are documented patterns that appear together, creating an unmistakable profile. Here's what I need you to understand. Recognizing these signs is just the first step. If you've identified someone in your life who's displaying multiple signs, especially if they're showing 4 or all 5, you can't just confront them directly. The attachment will sense the threat and either cause the person to cut you off or escalate their behavior. Instead, you need to approach this strategically. 3 immediate steps you can take right now. First, protect yourself energetically. This isn't optional. Start daily prayer or meditation practices that raise your own vibration. You can't help someone while you're being drained yourself. Second, document what you're seeing. Write down specific incidents with dates and details. Patterns become undeniable when you see them written out over weeks or months. Third, reach out to people who specialize in spiritual warfare, experienced clergy, deliverance ministers, or spiritual counselors who've dealt with this before. Don't try to handle this alone. The algorithm doesn't want you seeing content like this because it works against the cultural narrative that everything has a purely material explanation. But you know what you've witnessed. You know when something isn't right. And now you have language for what you've been sensing all along. Hit that like button so this reaches other people who need it. And watch for my next video where I'm breaking down the specific protection protocols that actually work, not the Hollywood version, but the real strategies used by people who do this work every single day. Timing is everything with this. The longer an attachment goes unaddressed, the stronger it becomes, and there are windows of opportunity that close. Don't let another week pass while someone you care about deteriorates right in front of you. I'll see you in the next one. Stay vigilant out there.